Well, hi everyone, and welcome to the Digital Smarts webinar for OAH TPP grantees. What we hope to do today and with our follow-up call next week is to help you to understand the components of a strong digital strategy and to identify next steps to improve your organization's ability to communicate on digital platforms. My name is Megan Downey, Project Director for Youth Catalytics, the organization heading up the Communications and Dissemination Priority Area for the LEAD Collaborative. And I'm pleased to welcome our trainer from Spitfire Strategies, Ellie Clairline. Before I hand it over to Ellie, I just wanted to preface the webinar by saying that we've heard from a number of grantees that you would like to see TPP-related examples in our trainings whenever possible. And you'll see that we have integrated some TPP-related examples here, but it's also really important to note that in many ways, you all are creating the examples that will be models for future TPP programs. Youth Catalytics and Spitfire will be working with TPP grantees to create some case studies for digital strategies as well as other aspects of communications and dissemination, and we look forward to sharing those with you in the coming months. A few quick housekeeping notes. While your registration email may have listed this webinar as lasting 60 minutes, it is actually scheduled for 90 minutes. And Chrome is the preferred browser for this online platform. So if you're having any trouble with the features, please consider using Chrome for future webinars. We will be using the chat box feature during the webinar today, which should appear in your control panel on the right. And those of you who attended the virtual prep sessions leading up to the Messages That Matter training in Bethesda may recall that we hosted breakout calls immediately after the presentations, and several grantees said that they wanted just a little bit more time between the presentation and the breakout call to think more about the content and formulate their questions for the trainer. So we will be hosting an optional call-in session next Thursday. The call-in time and dial-in information will be shared at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared with the grantees on the LEAD Collaborative website, as well as on the Youth Catalytics YouTube channel shortly after its conclusion. After the webinar, please do take a moment to fill out the very brief evaluation survey that should pop up on your screen. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Ellie Clairline. Ellie is a vice president at Spitfire Strategies, where she trains organizations on digital strategy and implementation, including grantees of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and Blank Foundation, participants in Spitfire's executive training program, and local partner organizations of the United Way and the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Take it away, Ellie.
Thanks, Megan. Hi, everybody. It's nice to meet you all virtually via the webinar. I like to start my presentations with a story. So this story comes from a nice lady named Amanda Carpenter, who tweeted last February 14th on Valentine's Day that she was trapped in an Amtrak station elevator on her way to Baltimore Washington Airport. And then about 7 months later, Amtrak replied and asked if she was still stuck in the elevator. And then she replied, "Oh, thanks. That was last February. I'm okay, but thanks for checking." So this is sort of a comical example of why listening on social media is so important. Social media is definitely a conversation, and it's not just a one-way form of communication. So you want to make sure that you're always listening to how the conversation is going. Otherwise, you may be missing out or just not doing it right and missing your audience altogether. So a lot of us envy large nonprofits, right, that they have this ability to do everything under the sun online. They have a big staff. They're always communicating and through every possible digital channel, like their websites, or they have an amazing Twitter following. They've got a bunch of people that like them on Facebook. They create all kinds of amazing video, and they even have games online for folks to play. More importantly, they are listening and measuring and reacting to what their audience is responding to. And it's always integrated, right? Listening there is always the center focus of what they're doing online. But we don't all have million-dollar budgets, right? We're not all millionaires, and we have to work with what we have. So this sometimes means we have to make decisions and figure out what we actually have the capacity to do within our budget and within our staff. So what we're going to talk about today is how you can divide your time across the most important channels in a really deliberate way, in a way that works on your limited budget and still creates a really comprehensive and integrated digital strategy, again with listening at the center. You'll hear me talk a lot about listening today, and we're going to define what that means in just a bit. But first, before we dive in, I wanted to sort of review what our goals for the session are today. At the end of the session, you should be able to answer these questions that you see on your screen. So, how do you know what's working for your audience and what they like? How do you create really great content, compelling content that's going to be spreadable online? What social networks should your organization be on, and how do you grow your audience in particular on those networks? And then, is your website really playing the role that you want it to for your communication? So those are the big chunks that we're going to cover today. But of course, those of you that are familiar with us at Spitfire know that we start everything with strategy. At the in-person training that many of you attended, we talked a lot about how to develop the right messages for your audience, how important it is to think about your audience's values and barriers, and who might be the right messenger for them. Who is it that they really listen to? So all of those lessons still apply here. Your digital strategy will only work if you've applied sound messaging and audience outreach strategy as well. Before you really begin to integrate digital into your overall comms work, you really want to think about how you can really plan out your strategy. And SmartChart is a really great tool for that. You can, as a reminder, you can access it for free at smartchart.org. And it'll really help you think through and outline your overall communication strategy. Digital should really be woven into that strategy. So a lot of, if you remember SmartChart, it'll come in really clearly in that activity section where you get to be creative and think about your tactics. But we tend, a lot of times as nonprofits, to sort of pawn off digital or social media on our interns or younger staff, which is actually fine if you've got folks who are really competent on digital, but you want to make sure that they aren't just out there doing their own thing, that everything that they do is central to your communication strategy. It's not something on its own silo out to the side. All right, so let's jump in. First, we're going to talk about how is it that you know what your audience likes and what's working for them. And I like to start this conversation with a little history lesson. So we like to think about listening in a bunch of different ways. It's really helpful to sort of think back in history for examples like the labor movement or the civil rights movement, and incorporate some of those lessons. So if you think about those movements, they really began with very personal contact. There were one-on-one conversations, and people knew the names and faces of their constituents, right? So African-American ministers could ask their congregations what really motivated them, what would motivate them to respond and act, and they had those conversations, and key here is that they listened, right? They were able to make decisions based on what was really going to motivate their constituents to take action. But then fast forward a little bit and we jump into the 1990s when sort of technology is really taking off and the internet was invented and really started to take hold and other folks were using it. We started to become a little bit divorced from our constituents or our audiences, and we started to stray from that central concept of listening. We lost a personal connection, and we found ourselves reading opinions of a few bloggers who were very opinionated folks that were involved in this one-way form of communication, right? They were pushing out their opinions in one particular form, and they weren't really paying attention of whether that was motivating their audiences, whether their audience really cared, or whether they were really going to act. So fast forward one more time to about 2004, and Google bought this company called Urchin and turned it into something called Google Analytics, which we all know now. So Urchin was this really expensive software tool to help measure the back-end analytics of websites. Google bought it and automatically made it free for all of us. So I hope that all of you have this installed on your websites. If not, that should be your #1 lesson when you head home, to ask your webmaster if it's installed and what your metrics are. It's a super powerful tool, so it'll really allow you to sort of get back into our roots and listen so that you can really drive your decision-making well. It'll tell you where folks come to your website from, so they may come from social media, They may actually come from a Google search, and it will tell you what words they are searching. And if they're even landing on your homepage, you may find that your homepage actually receives a lot less traffic than it used to, because now Google's algorithm can actually find other pages on your website and send people directly to the information that they're looking for. So lots of really interesting detail that you should dig into in your Google Analytics. But what we found a lot with working with organizations is that we're sort of listening in the wrong way. So we focus on what we call vanity metrics. So if you look on the very left-hand side of this graph on your screen, you'll see this is a chart from a report called eBenchmarks, and that 71% bar there indicates that the organizations that were surveyed actually make program decisions based off of the number of people on their email list. So that is definitely something that we call a vanity metric. If you think of the number of people on your list, the number of people that follow you on Twitter, how many people like you on Facebook, those are like the raw numbers. We call those vanity metrics. The metrics that you should really actually be listening to are what we call engagement metrics, and that is, if you look over on the right-hand side of this graphic, 44% of folks make decisions based off of the number of people who open their emails, right? And those are two very different metrics that you're thinking about, because you could have 100,000 people on your email list, but if only 100 of them are actually opening your messages and taking the action that you're asking them to take, then you're really not getting your message out to your audience, right? But if, say, 40% of them are opening your messages, then you know that that subject line was really helpful. It got people, motivated them to open, and then you can also track what it is that they do after they open your message. Are they clicking on the links that you have? Are they sharing the video that you asked them to share? So you always want to look at those different metrics that show you engagement. So listening is also really critically important for nonprofits that are focused on health, like you all are. I'm sure I don't need to tell you at all about all of the misinformation that exists on the web, especially when it comes to public health. Last year, there was a lot of misinformation circulating on social media about Zika. This is an example that we have here. And many of the rumors were really dangerous, but people, because public health officials were actively listening, so they were monitoring those conversations on social media, they knew the rumors and that were out there, and they were able to really correct that misinformation quickly. So another really important reason why you should be listening. Another reason to listen, also very important, is so that you can actually measure your success. So this is a social media monitoring report from a project we worked on with an organization called City Health. They aim to help cities thrive through policies that improve people's day-to-day quality of life, well-being, their health. And recently, they released an assessment of how healthy the country's 40 biggest cities are, based on things like whether the city has a paid sick leave policy or universal pre-K. And so when they released this report, we were able to use our social media monitoring tool it's called Newbie to track the assessment's reach, so the report's reach on social media. And you can see here that it was covered by a lot of local newspapers like the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Tennessean, but it was also shared by important stakeholders, and a really key audience for this, city mayors. So you can see there that the mayor of Los Angeles shared it. So it's a great tool to figure out whether you're actually reaching the audiences that you're trying to reach on social. So now we actually want to open it up for you all. If you can chat in the chat box, we have a couple of questions here for you to think about, and if you want to share your answers, or if you just have other questions that you want to talk through, feel free to chat your questions there, and we will take them and try to answer them as best we can. So first, I would love to hear how it is that you think you're listening well, how you might listen better, and some things to consider are, how often do you actually look at your metrics? Are you looking at them every month? Are you looking at them daily? Are you looking at them every year when you remember that you should be looking at your Google Analytics? Another really important question is the person who's creating your content also the person that's reviewing the analytics? And that's important because they're going to know what they change piece of content by piece of content. So if one Facebook post that you put up really takes off, they're going to know what it was that was different about that post from the last one. And then another thing is to see if you're actually looking at all of your channels. Do you tend to look at email more than you look at social or your website? So those are just some things to consider. If you've got any questions, or if you want to add in some other questions that folks might consider, please feel free to chat those into the chat box now, and we'll give you a chance to respond. All right, we're going to go, we're going to have a couple of different times for folks to ask questions, so we'll give you a second to continue here, but if you think of something as we're going, feel free to chat through that chat box.
Hey, Ellie, I think we did get one here, if you can see it.
Great. Awesome. Yes, so on questions 1, 2, and 3, no. So it looks like, oops, hang on, another one popped in while I was reading it. However, we are working on centralizing everything and rebranding. Great. So those are some things to consider, right? As you're centralizing, you may want to put a dashboard together to think through all of your different channels, right, and look at them in a consistent timing. And then we've got another comment here, a question. Upon looking at metrics, what do you suggest if there isn't any engagement on social posts that present thought-provoking questions, articles, or action photos? So if your engagement, this is particularly for Facebook, if your engagement has been dropping, that is likely because Facebook has actually changed its algorithm to make it harder for us. I have a love-hate relationship with Facebook that I'll tell you about in a little bit. But they have actually changed their algorithm so that brand pages, which are the ones that we have as organizations, our posts are actually not being put into our audience's feeds as much as they used to be. So they're sort of forcing us to advertise. So you will definitely see a drop in your engagement there. We're actually going to talk about different things that work on different social channels as we go through here. So I'm going to not answer this question fully yet because it'll get answered as we go through the rest of the webinar. Anything else before? Oh wait, there's another. Courtney asks or says, we do not have the resources for a dedicated staff person for communication, social media, etc. How do you suggest maintaining the analytics when we have multiple people posting and reviewing? So I actually think it's fine that you have multiple people posting and reviewing. I would, if you can, make sure that one person at least is looking at your metrics at least once a month. And it doesn't have to take too terribly long. You can just, we'll actually show you the back end of a couple of the different channels as we go. You can actually do a quick export and just look at which of your posts had really high engagement, and then you could follow up with the person who created that to see what it is that they did differently and compare. So it doesn't have to take a ton of time. I totally get that folks are strapped with the number of folks on their team. It looks like Amelia said, we look at Facebook Insights, but no other analytics. That's great. So very easy lesson for you to take back to also start looking at some of your other analytics. Hallie says, we look at our analytics regularly, but I don't think we are looking at the best measures. Since we have started launching our website now, we are mainly focusing on how many people are looking at the website, but not how they got there and what pages are most popular. We're only looking at the analytics on our Facebook and Facebook ads. So that's a really important point that you bring up, Hallie. I think particularly for websites, that is definitely something that most folks look at, are like the number of unique users that come to your website. You should definitely see where they're going. And another important thing that you can look at in Google Analytics is called your bounce rate. So that's how quickly folks actually leave your website. If you have a bounce rate in like 90% or above, then that means folks are landing on your website and immediately leaving because they're not finding what they're looking for. So you want to, and you can actually, through Google Analytics, you can follow the path of like if they start on your homepage, what's the next page that they go to, and compare that with the pages that you think are the most important for your audience to go to, right? And if those two aren't matching up, then you may want to reorganize your content so that that really important content is easier for folks to find. All right. So I do not recommend, there's a question about, do we recommend using Google Analytics for all channels? I would just use Google Analytics for your website and things that land on your website. So you may send a social media post to your website or an email newsletter to your website that if you link to it, you'll be able to tell where folks are coming from. But we're actually going to talk specifically about Facebook and Twitter, and they have built-in analytics into their platforms that are a lot better for you to use. These are really great questions. And then Susan says, Facebook pops up analytics, but I'm not sure what to think about them. More importantly, I'm wondering if we should take them up on our offer to boost our posts. That is a very great point, Susan, that we're actually going to cover in our next session. So I'm going to hold and not answer it right now. You guys are great. You're leading me into a nice segue. All right, so keep posting your questions and comments, and we will check in. But I'm going to keep going with the presentation. But let's keep the conversation going. This is great. All right, so how do we create great content? That's what we're going to talk about next. The important thing here to consider is that you don't necessarily need to think about going viral, right? Like that, I can't tell you how many people have said, hey, can you help me make this video go viral? But instead, what you want to think about is who it is that you're trying to reach and why. And it may mean that your audience is actually not everybody and their mama online, right? It's the likelihood is that that is not your audience. That who you really want to reach is who you should be writing your content for. And ultimately, you want to think about how do you engage those followers who are following you to do something with you and not for you. And that's really what we're going to talk about in this section is how do you create that great content that folks are going to want to engage with. Well, let's talk a little bit again about why you shouldn't focus on simply going viral. So, you know, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of causes that have benefited from having content go viral, but when you focus exclusively on creating content that will spread really quickly, you often lose sight of who you're trying to reach and why. So I'm sure you guys are familiar with this example, the It Gets Better campaign. This is a project that originally launched in response to a rising number of LGBT youth suicides, and folks really wanted to help youth deal with the bullying and discrimination that they were feeling in schools. The idea here was to have people later in life record testimonials about how their life actually got better after their high school years to sort of give youth hope that, you know, life is going to improve. And it was hugely popular. There were even anybody from the president to Ellen DeGeneres participated. But you all work with young people, so I'm guessing that many of you already have identified the weakness in this strategy. Recently, we read a research paper about the campaign, and what they found was they were actually asking youth to accept negative experiences as the only immediate coping strategy, with the promise that one day things in the future would get better, which actually made teens more stressed out, right? They were, you know, they are a culture of immediacy, and they were not that excited about having to wait another 10 years for their lives to get better. Very understandable. So instead, what they found was that young LGBT people should be encouraged to seek out other LGBT youth to find more immediate relief. So again, your lesson here is that just because something goes viral, it's actually not even helping you, right? You really want to think about what are the messages that are going to resonate with your audience and get them to do what you want them to do. All right, one of the best ways to actually empower your audiences is to tell a really authentic story. Stories are a great way to get folks to identify and really act on your behalf. And we all have important stories to tell, right? A lot of times, though, nonprofits, they get sort of tangled up in the policy details, or they don't tell the whole story to their readers, and so they end up in this situation that we call black box. There's like some mystery that we don't understand in the story that could really help us untangle what it is that they were trying to get across. One of the most powerful things that you want to think about when you're drafting a story is to really help your audience see themselves in the characters in your story and sort of tap into those emotions that will convince them to take action or support your cause or even dispel a myth, right, about a community or an issue. So this is a really great example from a woman named Sarah Walsh. You guys might recognize her. She's a former ESPN broadcaster, and she shared her story about infertility and motherhood on Instagram this past Mother's Day. And I'm just going to read a little bit of it. I want you to think about what are some things that might either resonate with you or someone you know, or things that you can identify with. So she wrote, "My mother bought them these onesies because she thought they were funny. For us, they were especially poignant. Finding a good egg didn't come easy for me, and I suspect there are many people out there facing the same struggle. The road down a dark path began while hosting SportsCenter on the road from Alabama. I arrived in Tuscaloosa almost 3 months pregnant. I wouldn't return the same way. The juxtaposition of college kids going nuts behind our set while I was losing a baby on it was surreal. I was scared. Nobody knew I was pregnant. So I did the show while having a miscarriage on television. My husband had to watch this unfold from more than 1,000 miles away, texting me hospital options during commercial breaks. It would get worse. 2 more failed pregnancies, more than once. I've had surgery one day and be on SportsCenter the next so as not to draw attention to my situation. When we then went down the IVF road of endless shots and procedures. After several rounds, we could only salvage 2 eggs. I refused to even use one of them for a long time because I couldn't bear the idea of all hope being gone. I blew off pregnancy tests, scared to know if it worked. It had 2 times. It was exciting, but we knew better than to celebrate. So I spent a 3rd straight football season pregnant, strategically picking out clothes and standing at certain angles, using scripts to hide my stomach. There would be no baby announcement, no shower. We didn't buy a single thing in preparation for the babies because I wasn't sure they would show up. We told very few people we were pregnant and almost no one that there were 2 babies. For those that thought I was weirdly quiet about my pregnancy, now you know why. For as long as I can remember, I hosted SportsCenter on Mother's Day, and the last couple of years that has been personally brutal. An hours-long reminder that everything that had gone wrong. I wasn't on TV today, and I'm not sure when I will be again, but instead I got to hang out with these 2 good eggs, my only good eggs, and I know how lucky I really am." So that is a beautiful story, right? I think if you want, go ahead and chat into the chat box some of the things that you may have identified with this. I mean, I think even outside of folks who have experienced miscarriages, right, like that's an obvious thing that folks are going to relate to, or things like IVF. You know, I have a friend who went through IVF, and it was a really difficult process for her. But I think you could also relate to the struggle of women trying to balance families and their work environment. Yep, being a working mom, Amelia said. So there are lots of different things that, or maybe your spouse or partner is away when something really horrible happens. You've got a crisis and you're having to deal with it by yourself. Or in public, if you ever feel like you've had a really awful day and something horrible happens to you and you still have to work, right? There's so many things that you could relate to in that story. But I think the beautiful part of it is there's a clear character, right? You can see who she's talking about and what it is. You can also see that there was a resolution to the story. A lot of times that's a weakness in a lot of our stories that we see nonprofits, right? They will paint a problem, but there's never a solution, or they just jump to the solution and they never actually explain what the problem is. But I also think this has the potential to be a very depressing story, right? And a lot of nonprofits will write stories that will just depress us because they want to explain how hard their issue is that they're working on. But you have to jump quickly from depression to hope or anger. Those are 2 emotions that will really galvanize people online, and she jumps beautifully to hope, right? So I think this is a really, really great example. So think about some of those tenets when you're writing your next story for online. All right. Another thing that you want to consider is really not to reinforce your audience's barriers. So we talked about this at the in-person training when we talked about values and barriers. And this is a firm rule that we have at Spitfire, that we do not use myth versus fact. The reason for that is the second that you say the myth, oops, I just lost my, there we go. The second you say the myth, that is what sticks in your audience's head, right? And this is a particularly bad example because you can see the myth is bright and red and simple and short and easy to digest. The fact is really long, and if you read it, it actually makes you think that maybe SNAP is actually not that helpful of a program, right? The average meal equates to roughly $1.40 per day. And in most cases, the money runs out before the month ends. So really, like, why do I even supporting that? It's not very much money, and the money runs out. Why would I want to support SNAP, right? So this is also really important for online content, and I can't stress this enough. You want to think about what it is that you're going to bold when you are writing content online, because no one reads everything online, right? You want to make sure that you're bolding the content and highlighting the content that you want folks to skim, because they are not going to read everything that you write. So this is obviously, the bold is actually what you don't want people to pay attention to. All right, another important key thing for creating good content is to include an emotional ask, and this is a great example from the American Lung Association, to just make the case that kids should be able to play outside and not worry about ozone limits and harmful things in the air that make them hard for them to breathe. They've got a great photo of a cute little guy. I mean, how can you not want to take action for him, right? My guess is that a number of you also produce reports. So this is a really great example. A lot of nonprofits will actually just produce the report and then tweet it out and expect folks to share it. What you want to think about is how you can really visualize the results of your report online. So this is a great example of what we call data visualization. It comes from Public Radio International, and it's they're using data from a report that was released by the Union of Concerned Scientists about tidal flooding. So this is actually a live interactive map online, and when you click on one of those cities, it will actually play the song Ice Ice Baby at a faster and faster rate as the sea levels start to increase over time. So it'll tell you between now and 2030 how quickly sea levels are going to rise, and you'll actually hear it. So it's a really great way for people to digest that data instead of just saying, by 2030, the sea levels will have risen 50 feet. You'll actually hear the song getting faster and faster. So think about some of those creative ways that you could take your main finding out of your report, and it doesn't have to be something that's sophisticated. It can just be an infographic that visualizes what it is, so that we know all content online needs to be visual, right? So you want to be able to sort of wrap up that main point with a nice graphic that folks can really digest. Then once you've created really great content, you want to think about how it is that you can spread that content. So this is an example that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, the EpiPen crisis that Mylan created. So Mylan hiked up the price of their EpiPens by 400%. And this was actually really dumb timing on their part, because the timing was right around the time that parents were sending their kids to summer camp and getting ready for back to school, which are times when parents think about the need to have a fresh EpiPen for their kids with allergies. So this all took off actually because of a Facebook post online. There was a mom in Brooklyn who was talking to her friends about this price surge because she had to buy a new EpiPen for her son, and she was irate about it. So again, anger helps things take off online. So she posted, and then there were some other really key folks that we call influencers that really helped this take off. So in the upper right-hand corner there, you'll see Robin O'Brien. She is a prominent blogger who is super credible amongst moms. She has done TED Talks. She's really great about, she's a huge allergy advocate for children. So she actually posted on social media and got hundreds of thousands of signatures asking Mylan to reverse their decision. And then a little bit later, you see in the lower left-hand corner, Bernie Sanders chimed in, and he actually had a different tack, right? So he maybe wasn't speaking directly to moms, but he was tapping in to corporate greed and the fact that Mylan did not need to increase their costs so much. and that really played in well with his supporters. That was one of the key tenets of his campaign. And then you see another really credible messenger there, the American Medical Association. So all this to say, this really took off, but each one of those influencers were speaking to a different audience, right? So part of allowing your content to spread is sort of letting go a little bit of control and letting people tailor it to their audience. And then finally, Moms Rising actually, just a few days after this debate started, they were really smart and organized an online group and hosted a Facebook Live video so that they could actually share the story from a mom who relies on EpiPen. So a great way of sort of taking advantage of that moment. We like to say that luck favors the well-prepared. They were ready to jump on that. But sometimes, as prepared as you can be, you have to adjust and adapt. So this is an example from the big climate summit that happened in Paris last winter, where organizers had planned a big march throughout the city, but about a week or two before the summit is when the Paris terrorist attacks happened, and the Parisian authorities, very understandably, announced that they didn't think they could allow the march to continue because of security concerns. So what the organizers did was really smart. They asked everybody to go and pose and leave their shoes in this park so that if you couldn't march, you could at least show that you were in support of this climate march. And then they took photos, and it just blew up online. It was a really poignant way of still showing support even though they weren't allowed to march. All right, so now it is your turn again. I would love for you guys to share what are maybe 3 things or just one thing that you think you could do to improve some of your organization's content. We will open that chat box back up again. Give you guys a second to chime in. I know you guys have ideas. You're just being shy. Oh, great. Now they're all flowing in at once. I feel like everybody hit send at the same time. All right. So let's see. One thing my organization can do is to incorporate what focus groups say regarding how positive messages can change their behavior around sexual and reproductive health. That's great. Yeah, so really tailoring your messaging in a way that you know has been tested to work. Utilizing positive content and messages. Great. That's from Daniel. Megan says engage more followers. Awesome. Great. Yeah, so really think about how it is that you can tailor your audience for an audience, using those important messages that you know are going to work, but also really thinking about what kind of emotion you can tap into online, because that's really what's going to help you spread that content. Great. We've got from Susan, catchy graphics and photos. Amelia, we're trying to do a Meet the Youth Leadership Council member series of posts. Oh, great. So that's a great way to sort of incorporate stories if you feature folks from your network so that other people can actually see themselves in those features. Oh, now you're all coming in so fast, you guys. We create a lot of resources at AHI, and I think highlighting those on social media is a good way to engage people and get the word out. Great. Good idea, Matthew. And Susan seconds that your idea is great, Amelia. Awesome. And Haley says, figure out what is relevant or trendy with youth and piggyback off of it. Yeah, that's really smart. You want to tap into what folks are already thinking and talking about. All right, good thought. So let's keep going. Keep chatting in there if you think of other things. All right, now we're going to talk about social networks. So you really want to think about which network you should be on for the audience that you're trying to reach. And we often get this question of like, should I be on Facebook or should I be on Twitter? What about Instagram? How am I supposed to use LinkedIn for my organization? And we always ask, one, is do you actually have the capacity to be on all of those channels? Because you can be on 5 different channels and not do any of them well, and you're not going to engage any audience. So you really want to think about where your audience is on those channels. And then it depends on the type of person that you're trying to attract, right? So Instagram is great for younger folks. Facebook has the largest audience by far and skews a little bit older. Twitter is really important for reporters. We're going to talk a lot about Twitter in a second. We've actually had some organizations use LinkedIn in a really interesting way. Folks will use it to reach professional audiences. So if there are funders that you're trying to get introduced to, or you want to recruit somebody to come speak at your gala and you don't really have a direct relationship with them, but you can get introduced to them through someone that you know on LinkedIn. It just happens to be a place where folks are more open to having you sort of cold call them or cold email them. They're going to be more likely to answer over LinkedIn. So it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. But we're going to dig into some of these channels more specifically. So let's talk about Twitter. Over the last few years, Twitter has really become a significant vehicle for online outreach. A lot of audiences, in particular, I would say journalists, will actually give their handle out as the only way of contacting them. There are a lot of reporters who won't pick up their phones anymore and hardly read their email, so Twitter is a great way to get in touch with them. But more importantly, there's a vast network and conversations that are happening on Twitter that you really should be tuned into, because you're probably missing out on really easy opportunities to engage your audience. So let's talk through some of our best practices. You want to make sure that you're using hashtags. So this is a really great example from OAH, actually, who uses hashtags that are really relevant to their issues. One of the other things that they're doing well here is using engaging content. So this was a question that came up earlier. On Twitter in particular, photos and links will, from their own reports that they've released, they say that you get about 35% more engagement than text-only tweets. So it doesn't have to be every single tweet that you tweet out, but think about how you can incorporate some images or links into your tweets, because that's going to get you more engagement. But you also want to make sure you're using hashtags. So that's how conversations happen on Twitter. So I would really encourage you to do some research and think about what are some of the hashtags that folks are using in your issue area, because there could be whole conversations that you could insert yourself into just by using that hashtag. There'll be folks that are following the hashtag that maybe aren't following you. All right. Next up, you really want to think about the importance of conversations, right? So Twitter is definitely a conversational platform. It's really open. You don't have to follow people to be able to communicate with them. So you want to really mix up your posts. You want to mix up original tweets with retweets, with comments, and you'll see here that the MacArthur did a great job of retweeting, and then on the left there's a good example of using this opportunity to sort of respond to the news. So it doesn't always have to be you're tweeting out your own content of a report. If there's a really interesting news article that comes out, you can share it and give your own take on it. Or if somebody else who is a big influencer in your space tweets out something, you can retweet it, or you can respond to them and give them your 2 cents. You want to make sure that you're thinking of Twitter as a conversation. It's not a one-way channel where you just give your opinion in 140 characters. And I mentioned hashtags and looking things up. You can also do some research for who those influencers are in your space. And one of the best tools to do that is actually available on Twitter itself. Oddly enough, it's kind of hard to find within the platform. So I usually just Google Twitter Advanced Search, and then it pops up like this. But you can plug in, sorry, my screen is doing something crazy. Are you guys seeing this? I'm not even touching anything. It's working okay? Okay, it's just flickering for me. All right, so you can plug in different phrases or words. You can plug in hashtags to see who's using them. You can even limit it to a particular location. So like say if you only care about what's happening in Atlanta, you could actually limit the conversation to folks tweeting in the Atlanta area. So I would encourage you to sort of test that out and see if you can't figure out who some of those influencers are that you should be following, but also what are some of the hashtags that people may already be using that you could incorporate into your tweets to get a little bit more engagement and get in front of different audiences and grow your own following. And then there are lots of different tools that you can use to measure not just your Twitter profile, but your own reach. Twitter actually has its own analytics, like I was saying before, and this is a screenshot of actually our analytics on Spitfire's channel. So you want to look at the bottom left-hand corner here. You'll see you can actually export these different tweets with the number of impressions that they get and their engagement rate. So that engagement rate is the thing that you really want to pay attention to month by month and see what tweets really got more engagement and do a little bit more of that. Another cool thing that Twitter Analytics will show you is to give you sort of a better understanding of your audience. They'll give you a breakdown by gender. You can see here that our breakdown is actually skews very heavily female, which is not terribly surprising considering we're a communications firm and a lot of folks in the communications world are female. But you can also get a sense of what folks are really interested in terms of, whether they're interested in politics or tech. And we actually tweet a lot about these things, so it makes sense that a lot of our audiences are interested in those things. So we've got a couple of questions coming in. Emilio's asking, how do you get to the Twitter page of analytics? And it's actually just analytics.twitter.com. So pretty easy to remember. You've got to be logged in, obviously, and you'll be able to see that and access all these analytics on the back end. And then I think there are a couple of other questions. So what's considered a good engagement rate? It really depends. You're going to get a higher engagement rate when you have more followers. So there's not like one good number that I can give you, but I think you want to sort of use your baseline as a good judgment and then work to increase it from there. It's sort of like comparing apples and oranges with folks that don't have a high following and folks that do. Let's see. In your opinion, how important or helpful is it for our program to be on Twitter? So that is a great question, Susan. It really depends on who it is that you're trying to reach. If you are trying to reach policymakers, you should absolutely be on Twitter. If you interact with a lot of reporters, you should definitely be on Twitter. Government agencies, it's another good reason to sort of interact with them. There are a lot of youth on Twitter, but not to the degree of like Instagram and Snapchat, and so we're going to talk a little bit about those in a bit. But one of the things we will talk about also in a little bit are this guide that we have called Digital Smarts, and you'll see in there some recommendations about why you should be on these different channels. So we're going to share that with you all as well. All right, let's keep going. So another really cool way that you can sort of measure your success on Twitter is with this tool called TweetReach, which is actually free to a certain degree, and then you can pay $20 to have it pull the last 1,500 tweets. So it's a one-time pull using a particular hashtag, and this is an example of a Twitter chat that we did with a client actually a little while ago. They work to really tell a positive story about African American men in communities and all of the amazing contributions that they make to sort of fight the negative narrative that exists out there. So we helped them organize this Twitter chat, and you can see here it was super successful. They reached 612 different accounts with over 3 million impressions, and a lot of that is due to this very first guy under top contributors. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Baratunde Thurston, but he is the definition of the perfect influencer for this issue. He already had a big following on Twitter, so that's one qualification, but he's also super credible. He actually hosted a podcast called About Race. He wrote a book called How to Be Black. He is a prolific tweeter. He was the digital director or editor for The Onion. Sorry, I always blank on what that is. So really, he's not only is he a prolific tweeter, but he's really funny. So he was a great addition for this, and he really helped them grow their following. Oh, great. Adam says, TweetReach is cool. Thanks for sharing. All right, so let's keep going. Twitter chats, like I just mentioned, they're a really great way to grow your audience. So this is just an example of a screenshot of one that happened. And you'll see here on the screen there's A9 and A8. So what that's indicating to you is that this is a conversation that was happening, and those are the answers to particular questions that went out. And that's a good best practice for Twitter chats, which are, I should explain what they actually are. They're conversations that you schedule in advance. So it's sort of like having a panel discussion at a conference, but you're doing it online. So you'll advertise it in advance, you'll recruit people to actually serve as sort of quote panelists. You'll actually come up with questions in advance and allow folks to come up with their answers in advance, and that's because if your Twitter chat is successful, it can become really wild when you send out a question and one person answers, and then you'll have a flurry of different people chiming in with their 2 cents. So it's a really great way of sort of orchestrating a conversation about something in particular online. Usually folks follow it by a hashtag, so you would create a hashtag particularly for that Twitter chat. And we actually have guides on this in that Digital Smarts guide that I was telling you about. So you'll be getting a 2-pager about how to actually organize your own Twitter chat, or you can take some of the same lessons in how to participate in one. And also about live tweeting, which is another really great way of how to grow your audience. So this is the difference is that this isn't necessarily something that you organize in advance, but a Twitter or live tweeting would be when you're at an event, you actually tweet what's happening at the event. So you'll see this a lot at conferences when they ask folks to tweet with a particular hashtag. What you want to think about here is really tweeting the substance of what's happening, so not just a photo of like your executive director on the panel, but what does your executive director actually say, right? And what are the really important 2 cents that other folks are saying, because that's going to identify you to other folks as somebody who's really credible to follow. All right, any questions there before we move into Facebook? Just checking to see if we've got any questions here. All right, Susan says, our awesome Minnesota Public Radio station holds Twitter voting song wars that is fun. Would you recommend this as a method to engage people? That's a really interesting idea. I would do that if you think, one, you'd have enough folks to participate. So you could recruit an influencer sort of like Baratunde and test it out and see. I think you would need to have some sort of reward for folks to participate if you're going to ask them to vote on something or give their opinion. But I think it could be an interesting experiment. Or you could ask them to like tweet out photos of support for a particular thing, so that then you could actually repurpose some of that content on a blog. Let's see, we've got Amelia says, we post on Instagram and automatically share on Twitter. Is it better to post directly on Twitter? Yeah, unfortunately. It is a really, and Instagram actually probably does the best job at integrating with other platforms, but you will notice if you post it directly on Twitter, you're going to get a lot better engagement. And that's just, I think it's something with their algorithm that they just promote stuff that is posted directly on, and that is definitely the case for Facebook. You will not see nearly as much engagement if you post from Instagram and share it directly to Facebook. Let's see, Amelia says, we also use 3 platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Is there a way to pre-schedule posts to be shared on all platforms at once? So you can, this is also another sort of something to weigh. You can use things like Hootsuite to pre-schedule. You're likely to get less engagement though. I would actually pre-schedule in the platform itself. So it's going to mean you have to pre-schedule them in 3 different places, but I think it's going to give you a better return on your investment if you do. And then Megan says, is it okay to post the same thing on multiple networks? Absolutely. I think you can definitely post on the same content on different networks. You can even repurpose stuff, particularly on Twitter, and repost it on Twitter a couple of different times. Because if you think about Twitter is so fast-paced, the likelihood that somebody is going to see all of your tweets and be like, oh, that's the same one they already posted is very small. you could even just tweak the language a little bit and repurpose. We used to do this I used to run digital at a big nonprofit before Spitfire, and we would actually repurpose a lot of our tweets that we knew were sort of evergreen and could last through the weekend, so that we had tweets scheduled to go out over the weekend without actually us having to post, because that's a really high time for engagement when folks are online. So think about when you want to have things go live too. Unfortunately, no, Lauren, I see your question. Instagram does not have analytics. I'm hoping that they're going to develop them soon so that we can get some of the good stuff like we can off Facebook and Twitter. All right, there are some things, though, that can help you sort of figure out like sort of mismatch on Instagram. And we're actually, I should mention, putting together a two-pager for you all on Instagram. So we're going to have that in the coming couple of weeks so that you'll have sort of a good how-to guide. All right, let's keep going with Facebook. So Facebook is very different than Twitter. I know you guys know this. The big difference is that it's actually a really closed environment. So you have to be friends with someone to see their content, or you have to like a brand page to see their content. It's not open like Twitter so that you can actually see somebody's tweets without following them. So big difference. It is also a very visual platform, so you want to make sure that you're mixing up your content with images and links, and nowadays video is really the big thing on Facebook. This is just an example of a client that we worked with a couple of years ago now on, they're called Running Strong, and this is an academy that they put together for 10 different youth. Native American youth across the country. They all got $10,000 grants to sort of pursue their dream in their local communities. And this is a photo of them taking photos of their dream, and then they turned it into a really nice album that they used all over social media when they had everybody together here in DC. So a fun little way to sort of create nice visual content. I would also encourage you to have a really personal tone on Facebook. I think we tend to sort of sound like robots as nonprofits, particularly if your profile image is your logo. You want to make your post as personable as possible so that they feel like it's coming from a human. All right, so Facebook ads. This is where my love of Facebook comes in. You've learned about my hate already. I told you that Facebook is sort of forcing us to advertise, right? But the beauty of this is that you can actually test out content for very cheap on Facebook. You can boost a post for as little as $5. And the beauty of that is you can test all kinds of cool things. So this is a campaign that we ran last year here at Spitfire to sort of test out messages in different audiences. So one on the left was a group of Latino conservationists that we were working with, and we were trying to figure out what might motivate other Latino conservationists to protect the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And on the right is sort of the same thing, but with African American conservationists. And you can see they're very different messages, right? Like one is more focused on indigenous rights, the other is more focused on climate change, and we were able to really figure out from these ads what it is that was motivating those audiences. And one thing that we really need to make clear at this point is that you really can test ads with different groups, but you can't use your federal funds for lobbying. So you can see here that this was actually to push Congress to protect the refuge. So we just want to make that clarifying point. And if you, for information about communicating with decision makers and lobbying restrictions, you can refer back to the decision makers webinar that we did a few months ago. All right, so there's my little bit of love for Facebook. All right, the other cool thing about Facebook is that they actually do have a pretty robust analytics system, so it's called Insights. And you can find all kinds of great things from there. So if the folks are coming from a different place, you can tell what that referral source is. What I think is most important to take a look at is actually the reach and engagement of your posts. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, it's very similar to that Twitter screenshot that I showed you. You can actually export your engagement for all of your different posts and figure out what was really motivating people. Another really cool thing to take a look at is when your fans are actually online. You may find that you have more people online when you are not at work, and that's where it's actually really important for you to schedule things to go live when the majority of your audience is online. All right, and again, you've got some more tools for advertising and just for Facebook and Twitter in general in Digital Smart, so that will be coming your way. Any questions here before we move into Instagram? All right, let's keep going, and feel free to chat your questions in, and we'll answer them as they come in. Oh, we do have one. Hang on. Where on Insights do you find when your fans are online? So if you look here, once you're logged into Insights, see that top tab there that says when your fans are online? You'll just need to click on that, and it will give you this graph. They often change their insights, so you may have to dig around if it looks a little bit differently. This drives us crazy. Every time we take a screenshot for a training, they have to change it. But that should be where it is. This is a pretty recent screenshot. And then Amelia says, I know an organization that needs to get approval from their program director for every single post. What are the pros and cons of this? Is this considered a best practice? So that's a really good question. It can definitely be challenging if you need to respond quickly. So if there's something happening, like the EpiPen example is a great example, you want to get in at the beginning of that wave when something is really moving online. That can definitely be a challenge. But the flip side of that is if you are, this is social media and it's live, and if you post something that's going to anger an audience or anger one of your funders or anger a policymaker, then you could have real problems. So you sort of have to weigh those balances. Ideally, you've got somebody posting that's senior enough that can make those decisions or at least sign off quickly if something happens. But I do think this is a challenge that a lot of organizations face, particularly when they're new to social media and they've sort of outsourced it to a junior staffer who doesn't really have the the power to make those tricky decisions. All right, let's keep going. So Instagram is a really great channel for you to reach younger audiences. When you compare it to other social media apps, it still remains the most preferred amongst teens and young millennials. Over 50% of users in the States are between the ages of 18 and 29, so it skews very young. It also plays really nicely to the desire that we sort of talked about earlier of young people to sort of get the biggest possible audience for their posts. We like to call this chasing Insta fame. So there's a mechanism called regramming that users can use to sort of regram other people's photos with hashtags and or their usernames so that they can get noticed by a bigger audience. You'll notice that there's an ego theme of a lot of this social media. So this is an organization called Rails to Trails, which actually has a lot of really interesting posts. They are using their platform to sort of encourage cause awareness for their audience, and in particular, it's super helpful for them because their mission is to create a nationwide network of trails from former railroad lines that connect corridors for healthy places for people in their communities. So each photo that they post here captures that particular journey that's taking place because of their successful efforts. And what's really unique about this is that they actually have an active community of people that take the photos themselves and then Rails to Trails post them. So it's a really cool way of getting their audience engaged and sort of empowering them to create some of those cool photos. This is another really interesting example that actually comes from France. There's an organization called Addicts Aid, that recently launched this campaign. It was called Like My Addiction. The point here was to raise awareness for alcoholism amongst young people. So they used Instagram and they created this fake account for this woman pictured here called Louise. You know, she's seemingly a happy-go-lucky young woman, but in almost all of her photos, she's holding a drink. So the campaign hoped to sort of convey the difficulty of detecting addictions, and it really turned out to be sort of a booming success. They got media coverage that was generated all over the world. They were a trending topic on Twitter in France. They got a significant boost in traffic to their website. And then adding up Instagram and YouTube and Facebook views together, they got over 500,000 video views. So it was a really great way of raising awareness about this issue. And you'll notice here at the bottom, they use a lot of different hashtags. So that is actually a best practice on Twitter. I mean, sorry, not on Twitter, on Instagram. I was going to say that's very different than Facebook and Twitter. You don't want to use more than one or two on Facebook and Twitter, but you absolutely do on Instagram. It's one of the ways that people will find your photos in your posts. All right, so Snapchat is another really great tool for reaching young folks. It's probably the most popular right now with younger demographics. I think over 60% of users in the States range as young as like 13 up to 38. It's pretty unique. It's actually kind of a disruptor in social media. So, sorry, it seems like we have a question. Hang on. For Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, are there different rules on ideal posts about amount per week? Is there a number of posts that's too much? So that's a really good question, Megan. There is never too many posts for Twitter. You could post once a minute and it would be fine for people on Twitter. No, I'm just teasing. For Twitter, I would shoot for at least once a day. If not, you know, 2 or 3 times a day. And again, it does not have to be your own original post. That includes retweeting or responding to news. Facebook, you should really just test it out. I would actually think more about what are the important moments for boosting a post than worrying about posting all the time on Facebook, because your engagement is going to be really low with just organic posting because of the Facebook algorithm thing we already talked about. So I would think pretty strategically about when you want to invest a little bit of money. It does not have to be very much at all. And then Instagram, I would test out with your audience. I don't know that there are really set rules yet for that, but I would wager that you at least want to post probably 2 or 3 times a week for folks to see. But all of these rules, I will say, really depend on your own personal listening. So you may have an audience that doesn't really care if you post every day, that they are going to be engaged if you post once a month. So it's going to really, and that's very true for email. Everybody's email metrics are totally different. All right, so let's go back to Snapchat. I was just saying that Snapchat is actually really unique. It's sort of been a disruptor, and even the fact that like it was created in a different place. It's not a Silicon Valley social media platform that was created by all of those Silicon Valley folks. It was a different part of California. Their model is actually that you post, and then within 24 hours, your post actually disappears. So it's kind of interesting. It makes folks more inclined to pay attention to your post because they know it's going to disappear if they don't see it. Let's keep going. Sorry, it was frozen here. There we go. So another really important part of Snapchat are these things that they call stories. And that really allows the user to submit their own Snapchats to a public story that's curated by a Snapchat staff. So the stories can be tied to a specific geographic location. A lot of folks are doing this like for weddings now, or a holiday, or a big event across different locations. And anyone on Snapchat can actually search for and view these publicly. So they're Snapchat-wide stories. And by engaging users to submit Snapchats at an event you're hosting or Another event that you know is happening around the country, you can get your event in front of a much larger, even sometimes global audience. So this happened like around the Women's March. They were actually able to, Snapchat actually gave them their own event for that story, which obviously that's a huge, huge event. But I just want to give you one more example before we get to questions. So this is a super interesting campaign from the World Wildlife Fund. It's called Last Selfie, as you can see there with the hashtag at the bottom. And I thought it was really brilliant for Snapchat because it's about endangered animals. So their whole point was, will this be the last selfie that you see them take? So it just played in really nicely to the fact that posts actually disappear, just like these animals are at risk of extinction. And so what they did, it wasn't just on Snapchat. Snapchat followers of WWF got this Snapchat about Last Selfie, and then they were encouraged to sort of take a screen grab or capture an image with their phones and then repost it on either their own Snapchat or on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, and it became huge. It was wildly successful. So after just 1 week, they had 40,000 tweets reach over 120 million Twitter timelines. Like, that is ginormous. They had headlines in more than 6 different languages. It raised really global awareness, and more importantly for them, in just 3 days they reached their donation goal for the entire month. So really, like, it just goes to show that if you think of really creative content, and particularly for that channel, like, it was brilliant because folks were actually worried about these selfies disappearing, and it played in perfectly to how Snapchat's images disappear. All right, so now it's time for questions, and I'd love to hear a little bit about what some of your objectives are for your social media channels. We're going to go fairly quickly because we have a little bit more to cover. Let's see, we've got some questions coming in. I'm just trying to scroll to the ones that we've already answered. Do Snapchat pics stay around after the story deletes? So not visible to your, I think you may be getting to this question of like, can people still access your Snap? So nothing online actually ever disappears, if that's what you're getting to. These photos are definitely going to be held somewhere on a server that Snapchat manages. So the sort of the joke about Snapchat was that it was created back, you know, for people to take inappropriate photos and just send them out. And I think that may be what a lot of folks think that it still is used for, but that's not actually the case. So I will say, like, if you're worried about somebody seeing your photo, not that it's going to be something risque, but if you think it might offend an audience, I would not put it on Snapchat just to be totally safe. Because like this World Wildlife example, folks can actually take a screenshot and share it somewhere else if they see it. Courtney says, we work primarily with youth. How can we manage some of the risks that come with social media, particularly inappropriate snaps, DMs, etc.? So you're worried about, Courtney, I'm going to ask you a follow-up. Are you worried about what youth may actually snap themselves, and how do you control for that? And I'm going to let you answer that while I look at a different response here. So the objectives are to, oh great, so this is somebody answering a question about, or my question about what your objectives are. So the objectives are to spread awareness of the program, inform priority populations of our objectives, engage and recruit for events and focus groups. Great. I think those are all things that you can accomplish on social media if you just really want to think about which channel you want to be on. And then Hallie says, our main objective is to increase traffic to our website. Our website contains all of our main content for teens, so we're using social media as a way to get them there. Great, so you're driving folks there so that they can access the different tools that you produce for them. You may also think about, are there ways that you can repurpose some of those tools and keep them within a channel? I know that may not be possible for everything that you produce, but you may actually see a little bit more success if you can think about what are ways that you can keep folks like either within Facebook or within Instagram, if you can actually like turn something into an infographic so that you're getting your point across without having to send them somewhere else. I know it's not possible for everything, but it's definitely something I would consider. Okay, so Courtney says, yes, I'll remind you guys she was asking about working with youth and inappropriate photos that might be sent. So this actually came up with that Running Strong example that I showed you guys earlier. One of their grantees actually had some more sort of inappropriate post in the sense that it was sort of like inappropriate language, not like photos in particular, but using like profanity. And so one of the things that we suggested is that they have a very clear social media policy. So if these are folks that are associated with your organization or just folks that you're interacting with as an audience, you can have a public-facing policy that you can often refer to. So you can say, we don't tolerate X, Y, and Z type of content, and if we find it, we'll delete it if you have control over it. It's also just smart to have that sort of policy that you can point to and say, this is how you should actually behave online, and this is why. Like, it's really important because it's going to come back and haunt you in your future, or you don't want to have somebody think negatively about your community in X, Y, or Z way. And we actually have a couple of social media policies, one guide to creating and then one template in the Digital Smarts Guide, so you'll be getting that as well. I can also share with you, I actually wrote one for my old job. I worked on immigration for a big Latino civil rights organization, and we used to get all kinds of really awful hate messages. So we actually created a policy that gave us cover if we deleted folks or blocked folks without them being able to come back and say to us, you're just trying to shut down the conversation. But it was a very clear policy that said, we are open to dialogue and you can talk to us all you want about policy, but the second that you use profanity or you threaten us or you insult us, like, we have every right to shut you down. And so I think you want to have a clear policy in a similar way that gives you something to point to and also just gives folks parameters and how they should handle your audience. So it's a really great question. All right, so Amelia says, is there a social media platform that encourages community for teens like a Facebook group? What would you recommend for this? That's a really great question. I might need to research it. I don't know. I'm actually not sure that teens would be willing to even join groups like that. Let me do a little bit of research and we can get back to you for our call next week that we have to follow up to see if there are any examples we can find of other folks that have done that. It's a great question. All right, so I'm going to keep going. Keep chatting in your questions. This is great. Now let's talk about websites. So I have a funny question for you. How many of you look like this when you look at your website? This is what a lot of people feel like, right? So we have to be honest, right? There are folks who hate their websites, and there are folks who just want to ignore their websites and want nothing to do with them. But you can't just ignore them. They're actually a super important part of your communications. They should be really the central hub of what you're producing. And there are a lot of really good reasons. Your website can actually serve different audiences, so you don't have to worry about just speaking to one. You can create content for different audiences, but you want to make sure that your content is really speaking to that right audience and they can identify what content is useful for them. Websites will cause a little bit of tension within organizations. There may be one person who has a say over what gets featured, or maybe one department feels like they're getting served better by their website than another. And so a lot of times they'll create this sort of like internal tension, and I like to bring up this study that was done for this very purpose. So this really smart guy named Jason Mogus worked with the global digital director at Greenpeace, and they did a bunch of interviews with a bunch of different organizations about how their digital teams were structured, and they came up with 4 different structures that they were seeing that existed, but their research pointed to this structure as sort of the best for digital teams. And this does not mean that you have to have a whole department of people working on digital. I know that there are folks who do not have that staff capacity, but what it means is that there is one person or half of one person that is responsible for thinking about digital. So that orange cluster that you see in the middle there is somebody who's really owning digital, but that everybody in every other department should also be thinking about it at some point, right? So they're contributing content, or they're expressing why a particular feature on the website might be helpful, or they are responding to an email message that's going out and saying, I thought this content was really great, let's do more of this. So that you really should be integrating folks from across the organization so that your digital experience, which is that cloud at the top, is really comprehensive and reflects the whole organization. All right, so this is just an example to help you think about audiences and websites. So I'm actually working with this organization right now. They're called the New Americans Campaign, and their goal is really to get all eligible immigrants that can apply for citizenship to apply. There's actually like 8 million people in our country who are eligible to apply who have not yet applied. And their website is their main tool that they send people to figure out how to apply and access tools and help, which this is currently what their homepage looks like. If you look at it, it actually looks a lot like a campaign website, right? They're celebrating their 5-year birthday as a campaign. They talk about the number of applications that they have helped people submit. Nowhere on here do I feel like if I'm an eligible immigrant, can I figure out where to access help? And that's their main audience. So what we're doing is helping them redesign so that you don't have to go through that very vague resources tab at the top and know to click on get help to figure out where you get help. So what we're doing is, this is actually a screenshot of the designs. It's not live yet, but this is what the website is going to look like. So you can see now everything in the navigation at the top speaks towards an immigrant that could possibly apply, right? You can find out about becoming a citizen. You can find help. You can find a citizenship event in your local area. You can find stories from other immigrants who have done it to show you that it's actually not as hard as you think it is. So you really want to think about who your target audience is for your website, and can you actually tweak your content to speak more directly towards them. And then this is just we can also share this with you. It's a dashboard that we put together for Google Analytics because it's not as easy just to export stuff like it is from Facebook or Twitter. And this will give you sort of an idea of what you should be tracking as you go to know month by month what are some of the different metrics. So you'll see their bounce rate that I mentioned earlier. You also want to look at how long people are staying on particular pages. So that's that average session duration and then pages per session. And then what are your top pages that folks are going to? You should have an idea of what pages you want folks to go to the most on your website, and you want to match up and see if those are actually the pages that you've got folks going to. So a good way of sort of structuring your listening for a website. All right, any last questions? Let's look through. Oh, great. So Lauren said they used to feel that way, but thankfully they just went through a major design overhaul. Awesome. Doesn't it feel great to have a new website? And Amelia says, what a different great switch. For employees who are very busy and social media is not a top priority, what would you recommend they use their time, resources to focus on? Oops, hang on, I just got another question popping up. Okay, so I think you're referring to that digital teams chart. So I do think it doesn't actually have to be very much at all time that other folks can sort of commit to this. One of the things that I think is really helpful is if you have an all-staff meeting or if you have weekly or monthly team meetings, it's a great thing just to add to the agenda. So, and make it like a standing agenda item so that you can say, this is what was really helpful for us over the last month. do you guys have any ideas for content in the coming months? So it's not something that they see as like another burden on their plate, but it's something that you're asking their advice and sort of guidance on. We actually do this at Spitfire. We have it as a standing agenda item at our all-staff meeting, and we report out, and we actually give a prize to the person who submitted the best content. And now it's become this sort of insane contest of who gets the prize every month. So there are ways that you can make it fun. Let's see, next question from Beth. Is there a quick way to build graphics, easy graphics building app? Yes, great question. So we use a tool called Piktochart, and there is also a two-pager in Digital Smarts that talks about building graphics and creating really cool infographics. So that is a great question. Oh, yep, and Courtney says try Canva. That's another really great one. Awesome. It looks like we have one more question from Kyra, who says, if you serve a variety of cultures and ethnicities, do all social media platforms automatically translate English language posts to other languages they prefer? No, not all of them, and I would actually sort of warn against allowing some other automated thing to translate your post. Even Google Translate is not that good still, which you think it would be after so many years. The organization that I used to work for, we actually produced stuff in Spanish and English, and it's way more effective if you have a real human translating your content than a robot, because there are nuances that folks are not going to pick up on. You also want to translate stuff for the audience that you're talking to, right? So like Spanish is a great example. There are different words that different subgroups of Latinos use when they're speaking Spanish. So Mexicans may use particular words to explain things, whereas Puerto Ricans or Salvadorans may use different words. So you want to think about who it is that you're actually speaking to and try to translate it as well as you can. If you don't have that capacity, then I think you can fall back on the automated translation, but if you do have any sort of capacity, I would encourage you to actually do the real translations. All right. So we mentioned earlier that we're going to have this follow-up call next week, so I just want to make sure you guys see this as a reminder. Our call is going to be next week at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, so think of other questions that you might have that we can answer for you. And this is our call-in number, just so you have it. And then our parting thought is just to let you know that you'll be getting this Digital Smarts Guide. So it's available on our website now. If you're dying to go to it, you can go to spitfirestrategies.com, and it's under the Tools section. And all of those chapters you can download as PDFs for yourself and print off, or we will send you a link to it as well so that you can get it directly in your email. And I think we are out of time. Megan, do you have anything that you want to add?
No, I think my contact information is there. So if you have any trouble getting a hold of the Digital Smarts Guide, or you need the call-in number again, feel free to email me or call me. I think that's it.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for joining, and thanks for all the great engagement and questions. We will talk to you next week.
Thanks so much, everybody.